Remember those roster limits coming to college football? Well, there's a new twist.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
All right, welcome everybody. It's Tuesday, April 8th. Connor Happer here from 1620 The Zone. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. There was another hearing in the case of the House settlement that will affect college athletics at large yesterday. Nothing finalized, but getting closer, discussing the terms, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. I think that sort of thing. And U.S. District Court Judge Claudia Wilken is the one kind of overseeing this entire thing. And she had a couple recommendations yesterday before this stuff all gets finalized. I think the first thing, the NIL clearinghouse thing is still relatively unclear, which, that would require athletes to go through a clearinghouse to prove that it is for and at the value of their name, image, and likeness if the deal is over $600, because they're already allowed to get paid for play by the universities. And as we know, NIL has been used as pay for play for since it's been in existence.
I think the more unlikely path for the clearinghouse to blow up, and Judge Wilken asked for justification from the NCAA, just more or less better wording within the settlement on why that is needed. I think the more likely path for that to get removed and blown up comes after the settlement takes effect, when
people start suing from
exactly when the lawyers get involved in later in 2025 and into 2026.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we're headed right down that path. Just feels odd to me. It's something that we've talked about on the podcast before. The whole any court case that we've seen with a student athlete against the NCAA or anything of that nature,
where they're trying to limit the amount of money that someone can earn. Those don't go well for the NCAA.
Yeah, shout out to Diego Pavia. That case is kind of hanging over this entire thing. Some rewording of the arrangement that would bind future college athletes to fit under the terms of that agreement. So that's important. And then there's this, and Mitch mentioned this in the cold open, and in my mind, it's significant and it directly affects Nebraska right now. There was some request to, instead of quickly and immediately move to a position where you're cutting all of these roster spots in sports across college athletics down, or you're at least changing the numbers significantly. In some sports, remember, you're going up. But specifically in football, you go from an unlimited roster position to 105. And Nebraska is one of the universities around the country, as we've talked about, who for a long time has taken more than 105 players on its roster, upwards of 150 sometimes. So they've been in the process, as we've talked about, of whittling this thing down, being relatively sure that come summer and come fall, you're going to have to be at or near the 105-man limit. There was a change, just a slight alteration to that yesterday, according to Judge Wilken.
Just slight. Yeah. She's concerned, and understandably, about the players who are just going to be cut and are going to be left without an opportunity to participate in college sports because of these roster limits. The roster limits, the principle here, the motivation is to create opportunities. And in which sounds weird when you say limit, but in many sports, the scholarship limit is going up. Basketball and football, it's going up. Right now, you can have 85 on scholarship. Right. There will be a 105 player limit. for scholarships. Now, that also is the cap of the roster. And if you are the University of Minnesota and you don't keep a 150 player roster or haven't traditionally, then this suggestion from the judge yesterday doesn't mean a whole lot, because you may have been at 105 in 2024 and 2023, and being there next year is not a big deal. All that happens as a result of the roster limit is you can hand out more scholarship money. And the bigger issue with the House settlement, and really the bigger issue for everybody with the House settlement, is the fact that revenue sharing will be introduced. But the roster limit for Nebraska has just been this burr in the saddle. It's been this storyline that's just kind of hanging out there. And Nebraska's been operating for several months now under the belief that it has to get to 105 by mid-August, late August, certainly by kickoff on August 28th, when the Huskers go to Kansas City and play Cincinnati. And now, as of yesterday, there is some newfound belief that they will be able to grandfather players in. Across college football, you'll be able to grandfather players in. If you're on the roster now, that means you're not on the chopping block. And it will be up to Nebraska to say, we'd like to keep 20 over the scholarship, 20 over the 105 limit. If in fact they may set like a scale and say you can be 20 over in the first year, you can be 15, 10, whatever it is. Or they may just say everybody who's on the roster now gets to expire their eligibility before this thing goes to 105. They'd be leaving themselves open to manipulation at that point, some kind of unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
You could then count your 5-star quarterback as one of the people who's over the limit. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that always happens with these rulings, but the short of it is that she's given the attorneys who are putting together the terms of this agreement another week to fix the stuff that she's suggesting they fix, and then come back to her, at which time she might just approve the whole thing. This has happened before in the House settlement, when it initially came to light, where the judge said, you may want to fix this, you may want to fix this, and you may want to fix this. And the lawyers immediately scrambled back to their offices and fixed those things. And then she gave it the green light to move forward to this point.
But we're close, because the overall the overall quote from yesterday from the judge was, quote, basically, I think it is a good settlement. Don't quote me. And then many people quoted that. But
super weird thing to say. Everyone's quoting you, Judge Wilken.
You're literally the judge overseeing this case. But yeah, they're close, and so they're going to get this stuff worked out. Now, I think this brings up a pretty interesting conversation that we could have here, just regarding, the roster limits and maybe a preference, I guess. Like, as Nebraska has been, preparing for this for, I don't know, the better part of a year now, basically, or at least thought that this was coming for a while now. You've been trying to get your roster just trimmed up as much as you possibly can. Like I said before, Nebraska has been a place where they have, because of what they have done in their history and what worked in, for a long time, and Nebraska has had 140, 150 people on it and ran 1, 2, 3, 4 separate teams and basically separate practices at once. And Tom Osborne was adamant about that, and then Scott Frost was adamant about it. When he got here, because he wanted to do everything that Tom Osborne did, basically. And so I'm curious, I guess, on your thoughts of what this means for the current staff and how they feel about it, given that they were headed maybe one direction and now there's just not maybe as much pressure.
Well, I'm sure one of the first things that went through the minds of Matt Rhule and others who are making decisions around the Nebraska program is like, can we just make a decision here? Because Nebraska went through this whole process in December where the coach sat down with players and told them where they stood on the 105 if it was set to be implemented at that time. And players transferred. Players have left Nebraska as a result of those conversations and gone to seek opportunities at Group of 5 schools or FCS schools or Division II schools in some cases, directly because this was coming. And now maybe it's not coming. I mean, it's coming. Like eventually there's going to be a 105. Like no one is debating that. Unless the settlement gets blown up, and not to quote the judge here, but the settlement probably isn't going to get blown up. Like it's going to move forward in a slightly abbreviated or a slightly altered form from what we see right now. So yeah, there's some frustration. I'm sure there's also a little bit of relief because you're thinking, all right, maybe we don't have to tell some of these players who have poured all of this energy and effort into Nebraska football. Maybe we're not going to have some of these extremely difficult conversations in May through the summer, but you've already had them with some players.
Exactly. And from a competitive standpoint, like obviously it's a pain in the ass for coaches to have those conversations and like when it comes down to that last one or two, those are just conversations that you might not have to have anymore. So that's great for those guys. But from like a competitive standpoint, I was sort of looking forward to everybody just being on the same playing field. I was sort of, looking forward to some uniformity in college football, and, we're close, but we're closer than we've ever been, but that exact thing is not going to happen this year. So it seems
maybe not,
anyway.
Maybe not. Yeah. I mean, generally it behooves the lawyers here, the NCAA lawyers, to listen to the judge. Like she's the one who has to give the ultimate approval. So I do think they're going to come back with something that is very close to what she's suggesting. Let's come back after the break and talk a little bit more about some of the ramifications of what this has for Nebraska and what the roster might look like in 2026, 2025, and 2026 as a result of what was discussed yesterday. That's coming up next. A message right now from Game Time. There's nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching a last-minute MLB showdown or soaking in the excitement of an NBA matchup. But finding great seats at a great price, that used to be a challenge until Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices tend to drop as the events get closer. And with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost up front. No surprise fees at checkout. Here's why I love using Game Time. There is priority. You got last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You can grab last-minute seats for a Royals game or a big basketball game. It's getting to be playoff time in the NBA. They've got zone deals where you can get a specific part of the arena or the stadium and zone in on that those seats. There's peace of mind because with seat views, you can check out the view from your seat before you get into the arena, before you pay the price. And then there's the lowest price guarantee. You can book with total confidence at Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets, download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, welcome back. Tuesday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Mitch Sherman, Connor Happer with you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for viewing us on YouTube. If you are listening and you want to check us out on YouTube, that would be great. You can see us smiling and waving. If you're watching us and you want to check out the audio because you're in your car and you're driving, we're on Apple, Spotify, all of those places. Monday night in the sports world, college basketball came to kind of like a crashing end, I would say. Florida beat Houston 65-63. One thing they did not have in the national championship game of the NCAA tournament was this.
Folks, they're playing for $300,000. Easy, pure.
Yeah. That's only they did not. They had a lot of bricks in that game. I was kind of amazed watching the first half. Like, I understand that there's a lot of pressure and it's high intensity, and these teams are playing amazing defense, and like they're on this stage that they've never been. These players have never been on before. But the number of ducks that were thrown up at the backboard was somewhat alarming.
Yeah, Walter Clayton was he was trying to get going. Florida's stud All-American. He was really trying to get going and did not score until 7-8 minutes left in the game, and then it had a big impact on the rest of the game. But yeah, 3 turnovers in the last 3 possessions for Houston.
Ooh.
You're gonna want that one back. That's that one's gonna sting a while, including on the last shot of the game where Emmanuel Sharp almost traveled.
I mean, it wasn't even a shot. They didn't get a shot off. They're down. You're down 2, and that's gonna hurt for a while.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly revisit one thing about the crown from our conversation on Monday. So I was surprised, Connor, at the amount.
People are mad about the crown, Mitch. People feel some type of way about the crown. If you don't give Nebraska their proper credit for winning the crown, it's going to be hell to pay, it seems.
That's kind of what it was on Twitter going back to Saturday. Like, just the question about whether this excitement should be tempered because Nebraska missed the Big Ten tournament, and then we got some comments in yesterday after our podcast posted, and I thought we were pretty complimentary of Nebraska. Saying, "Hey, this is a nice moment for the seniors." Nebraska did not win the NCAA tournament, but
that's
alas,
right.
I don't want to go down that road. I just want to say, like, they should enjoy this, and it is a nice moment, and it is something that you cannot take away from these players, that they ended their season on a high note. And I have no hate in my heart for Nebraska because it won the crown.
Not at all. But yeah, I don't know. I think people like to be patted on the back a little bit. Nebraska did a great job, and I felt like we patted them on the back, but I don't think it's that crazy to say it doesn't necessarily.
Oh, no.
Just saying.
You can say it.
I don't think it affects them. I don't think it affects them next year. Like, I don't think it affects their ability to recruit. I don't think it affects their ability to, like, I don't know, like, the players got $20,000 more a piece, and that is awesome for them. And it was a great way to not have the horrible taste in your mouth at the end of this season, the way it ended originally. Like, you fixed that. That's great. The memory of this team is now a positive one instead of a completely negative one. But yeah, it's
but that a lot of people just want the conversation to end right there, and I'll say that's fine. Well, next time we talk about Nebraska basketball, it might be a little bit. Maybe it'll be tomorrow because the Huskers score something big out of the portal. The crown needs to be set aside. Like, put the crown on a shelf, and you can admire it. If you want to hang a banner, should Nebraska hang a banner in PBA for winning the crown? Sure, they've done it for the NIT. We decided yesterday that the crown is bigger than the NIT, so it's the number 2 tournament out there. I say hang a banner. Have a night in November where you put a video up on the screens and you show that Gus with Connor Esigian and you got bringing back Juwan Gary, or maybe Juwan and Bryce will be playing professionally at that point. I'm sure on some level they will, but other than that, set the crown on the shelf and move forward and build for next year.
Somebody said on my show yesterday they should hang the crown from the rafters instead of making a banner. They should take the crown, hang it from the ceiling, and put like a little spotlight on it just at all times. And, people will be asking, like, what's that crown up there for? And then you'll have to tell them the story of that one time Nebraska went on a run and won the crown.
Could they put it like above the basketball apparatus, the hoop apparatus up there, so like you can see it in the background when people are shooting free throws? See, we're going down a bad road again and making fun of the crown.
It's not making fun of it. I think it's great. Yeah.
All right, let's finish up this discussion about roster limits and the House settlement and what the judge said yesterday in California. I think that Nebraska has recruited a certain way this year because of the incoming roster limit. And ultimately there will be a roster limit, but it might not be as strict as we've discussed in this show as we expected in the first couple 3 years of the House settlement. So I just want to look a little bit to the east at Iowa State and what they're doing, what Matt Campbell's doing over there in Ames as he builds his class of 26 recruiting profile. And among the 11 Iowa State commits for next year, you have Amarian Jackson, the wide receiver from Millard South. You have Caprice Keith, the athlete from Omaha Central. You have Barry Freeze, a new commit for the Cyclones just last week. Elkhorn North linebacker. You have Kean Kaiser from Sidney, Nebraska, a linebacker. And then Tyrell Chapman out of Lincoln North Star, a safety. That is 5 players from the state of Nebraska who are committed to Iowa State. And I'm not saying that all 5 of them would be headed to Nebraska in the old way of doing business without roster limits, but I think a couple of them would. And these are real world ramifications of what's going on with all of this roster stuff and the need to be more selective, not just within your own state, but around the country. Nebraska did make an offer a few days ago to Darian Jones, the DB from Omaha North, who's the brother of Donovan Jones. So perhaps the Huskers will have more of an in-state flavor in this class, but it's not going to be what we've come to expect in the past. That appears to be headed to Ames, Iowa.
So I know people get bothered by this. People get bothered by the in-state kids not being at Nebraska, and like I get it. Like you don't want to see those guys, you don't want to see like the class we saw 4 or 5 years ago in basketball going all around the country and being all Americans at places that aren't Nebraska, right?
Yeah, like, it happens a lot.
Yeah, that's tough to swallow. However, it takes some of the crap BS out of recruiting. Like it makes you be on. So Isaac Jensen, who's a highly ranked,
glad you brought him up,
tight end out of Millard South. He's not visiting Nebraska this summer anymore. He's not going to end up at Nebraska. He's going to probably end up at Florida State or somewhere else. Missouri, Texas A&M, Iowa State. He could end up at one of those places. But basically, he's not going to go to Nebraska. And that's so. Yeah, that's a guy that Nebraska probably would have been taking in the past, or at least
offered him. Nebraska offered him this year.
Offered him, But then you have all this thing where it's like, are they slow playing? Or are they actually going to take him? Or are they just holding a spot for him? Like, you see what I'm saying? It just forces the coaches to be a little bit more transparent. So if the coach, if Nebraska staff is sitting there and they're saying, yeah, this is a guy that when push comes to shove, at the end of the day, we're okay with losing. You have to make that declaration now. You have to make that declaration early. You have to be upfront with him in recruiting. And Nebraska has, it seems. And I can't fault them for that. Like I don't know. People get bothered by this stuff, by them leaving, but I appreciate the transparency I think that the roster limits have created.
Yeah, I hear you. I also will say there have been a lot of players through the years who would slip through the cracks in the current way of doing things and the new way of doing things. Players from the state of Nebraska or bordering states, they tend to be a little bit. Historically, Nebraska has tended to be more open to taking players. I mean, this is I'm not breaking news here. Players of like a marginal talent. Or like they don't have the rankings that somebody does from the East Coast or the West Coast or the South, but they'll take them because they feel that they're going to give the effort and the energy. They're going to be this important part of the program. And there are plenty of cases where those players burn out, end up transferring, don't impact the program. And then there are also plenty of cases where those players from within the, I don't even know if it's 500-mile radius, like 300-mile radius, greatly impact Nebraska. And the Huskers are probably going to be without those players moving forward, and you're seeing it already in the 2026 class. So perhaps the Isaac Jensen thing is an interesting one to watch, because the question is, did he decide to move away from Nebraska, or not physically move away, but move his recruiting away from Nebraska, or did Nebraska give him signals that did they slow play him? And if it was the latter, do the comments from the judge yesterday allow Nebraska to then go back to him and say, yeah, come visit us in June now that we think about it? And then how would he respond to that? We don't know. It'd probably be a good thing a good call to make to find out what's going on there in that situation. Because it's again a real world example of how all this stuff it impacts people.
All right. There is practice, an open period of practice coming up today. We'll take a look at what you can expect for the rest of the week in spring ball coming up next. All right, welcome back. So the week ahead, we'll see today, Tuesday, an open period of practice, which is worth something. You always get something out of that, especially like the second and third, time around, as we're now past the halfway point of spring practice. You have a pretty good idea of what you're looking for. Mitch, as you walk in this morning, any place specifically your eyes are going to be drawn to?
Yeah, well, if it depends what's going on, of course. If this is like what we've seen in the past springs, I remember specifically last year in this situation, there wasn't a great expectation that the media was going to get a big look at Nebraska's. Like we thought. Normally you get to see stretching, you get to see position drills, you get to see guys walking around and running a little bit, and that's beneficial to a certain degree. And then there was one spring practice last year, and I think it matches up with this one today, where the media was let out into the Hawks Championship Center, and they were running the offense. And
they were doing real football stuff.
Yeah. It was Dylan, and it was Heinrich, and it was Danny Kalen, and they were switching back and forth between the three of them. And we got to see like all three of them handle a drive or two. And that's a lot different than warm-ups or position drills. So that's my hope, that we get something like that. Now, there's no guarantee, of course. We might get the same thing we got a couple Thursdays ago and just like see the players in motion. But it's possible today that we're going to get a look at Nebraska's offense and defense in game type situations, which, if so, very likely the only time we'll see it until Arrowhead Stadium.
Yeah. And that's the case. If that's the case, I think, there would be a lot of takeaways from all the local media
takes for sure.
Who are covering it, not only on like personnel, but I mean, one of the stories of the spring now has been Dylan Raiola and his sort of command of things and how he's taking charge. And like Rhule talked about that on Saturday, the GoPro thing. Yeah. Right. So I think that'll be probably watched for pretty closely, just to see how real that is. Not that people don't believe it, but just they want to kind of see it with their own eyes. And then you look at personnel stuff too and see who's kind of out there, which will all be fascinating.
I want to see. So we're going to hear from Marcus Satterfield and Rob Dvorak today. I want to see, to go a different direction from those two, what's happening at receiver. Expect to see Dane Key and Ja'Cory Barney, like with the ones for sure. Who else? I mean, we haven't talked about Janiron Bonner, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just because like his production, he hasn't put up huge numbers, but he's a piece that Nebraska likes, and he's a versatile piece. Like he can play running back, if fullback, whatever, tight end if needed, and then he can also be a receiver. So is he the third guy with the ones at this point? Has Nizia Hunter broken through as one of the freshmen up at that level? So I'm curious about the wide receiver group. Same thing in the secondary. I think we expect that Sierra Wright is going to be running with the top group, but who else is out there at cornerback? Are they running with 3 corners? Like, what we hear a lot of talk when the conversation turns to defense this spring about packages and how Nebraska is going to be more multiple in the packages that it runs. And like, hey, Tony White, like he liked the 3-3-5, and you even heard Rhule suggest that Tony did a good job of adapting last year in doing some of the things that Matt Rhule wanted, like in implementing more packages that may not have been like in his comfort zone, in Tony's comfort zone. Well, it is in the comfort zone of John Butler and Phil Snow in the brain trust of this defense now. So we might be able to get a peek or just kind of a sense of what that looks like if it's a practice with like an 11-on-11 period.
Yeah. And just, I mean, so it's this full week, which will have 3 practices today, Thursday, and Saturday. Then there's next where there will only be 2. That's the short week. And then, game week, Husker game week, I guess, Tuesday, Thursday, and then the Husker games are Saturday of that week. So over the hill in terms of the halfway point of spring ball. So still some things left to find out before we get to the end of that, and then we head into full on like summer list season, Phil Steele's magazines and overs, unders, and wins and stuff like that. Like all that conversation, Mitch, I'm sure that you love it, right around the corner.
Yeah, let's make it through the rest of spring first before we start thinking about those lists and stuff like that. Media days is coming up pretty soon. It's going to be week 6 in the college football season.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing before we finish, Nebraska baseball tonight is at Kansas, nationally ranked Kansas.
Important.
We didn't talk.
They're ranked. Nebraska plays better when they're ranked.
Oh, that's true. We didn't talk. Oh, that's right. That's right. Throw a no-hitter tonight. We didn't talk at all about Nebraska's weekend after the back-to-back losses against Creighton and Omaha last Tuesday and Wednesday. Maybe we checked out a bit on Husker baseball, and that's not fair because Nebraska went and won 2 of 3 against Rutgers on the weekend at Haymarket Park. Couldn't get the Sunday sweep, which was probably needed for Nebraska because of its precarious spot in the Big Ten standings, but it didn't happen. So the Huskers head into tonight at Kansas, and I'll just ask you this. We'll finish with this. Is this a big game? Like, is Nebraska in a spot where the non-conference games matter at this point, or is really the only path out there for the Huskers to just win everything in the Big Ten and somehow try to like reinvent themselves, and it has to happen through the league?
Yeah, their losses haven't been that bad. They haven't taken like a real stinker yet this year. So I guess with the exception of UNO, who's played a pretty tough schedule. So I think they're probably, thinking about the Big Ten tournament at this point. Their RPI is 94 right now. So that's not obviously at large worthy. But that'll come up as they go along. So I guess I would consider this a big game. I guess I would consider this a big game for Nebraska. Kansas hits 1 billion home runs. That's their bit. So you got to manage that one tonight.
The Jayhawks are 27-6. So
correct.
This is like Kansas is like doing what Nebraska did in its heyday of college baseball. You know who went to Kansas and won this year? The Omaha Mavericks did. One game out of 3.
Out of 3, yeah.
1 set of 3, yeah. All right, I think that wraps it up for this Tuesday. Thanks for making the Locked On Nebraska pod your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball with Isaac and Andy. March Madness is over, but they're still reacting to what happened in the NCAA tournament. Go find them for everything that happened on Monday night in San Antonio as the national championship was decided and the Florida Gators walked away with the trophy. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.